Let's explore something fundamental today. The world doesn't weaken you. You weaken yourself the second you surrender control over your own mind. We study the Stoics because they understood this perfectly. We accept a hard truth here. You don't own outcomes. You can't control people. Circumstances won't obey you. But you do command your thoughts, your actions, and your daily discipline. Yet every single day, you trade that power away for comfort. You listen to that quiet voice begging you to wait, to rest, to just avoid the work that must be done. Inside your head, there's no actual chaos, just a choice. One path is ruled by reason, fierce discipline, and the pure will to act no matter how tired you feel. The other is driven by impulse, easy escapes, and a desperate need to avoid discomfort. My practice taught me you don't need to defeat the world. You just need to stop surrendering to your weaker self. Because the second you govern your inner world, the chaos outside completely loses its grip on you. This is our true battlefield. Completely silent, invisible, and totally unavoidable. The world isn't holding you back. You are strictly held back by the exact limits you tolerate inside yourself. You and I know this is the first truth most people avoid. It destroys every excuse they have. It's so much easier to blame bad circumstances, point fingers at the economy, or just wait for support. But absolutely none of those forces decide your daily actions. They might influence you, but they don't command you. In Stoicism, we draw a hard line between what we control and what we don't. And everything that shapes your real life starts on the side you actually control. Your specific choices, your discipline, your personal standards. Yet the absolute greatest resistance you face isn't some outside pressure. It comes from within. It comes from that version of you that grew completely comfortable with ignoring your true potential. This lesser version of you isn't loud or dramatic. It doesn't look like an obvious enemy. It is dead quiet, deeply familiar, and incredibly persuasive. It whispers that you have plenty of time, that one little delay won't matter, that resting is justified and the hard work can wait until you feel ready. It speaks in this tone that feels totally reasonable, almost protective. And that is exactly why it's so dangerous, because you don't even try to resist it. You just agree with it day after day. We make these tiny compromises not because we lack capability, but because we let a lower standard feel completely acceptable. In philosophy, we call this a failure of discipline, not in your actions, but in your core judgment. You've entirely misjudged what actually deserves your obedience. Your real enemy in life isn't difficulty. It's simply the part of your mind that constantly seeks to avoid it. It's the version of you choosing comfort over real growth, the one preferring cheap distraction over focus, trading your responsibilities for a hit of temporary relief. And the brutal cost of that choice is never immediate. That is exactly why you repeat it. You don't feel the crushing weight of one missed workout, one delayed project, or one broken promise to yourself. But over time, those tiny moments stack up into a pattern, and that pattern becomes your entire identity. You start viewing yourself as a person who starts things but never finishes them. Someone who knows better but refuses to act. Someone who desperately wants a better life but won't move toward it. This is exactly how your old self gains total power, not through brute force, but through daily repetition. The true Stoic practice forces you to confront this reality directly. You are never a victim of your environment unless you actively choose to be one. Harsh circumstances can definitely create pressure, but they cannot steal your ability to respond with pure reason. You always retain the deep power to act on your principles, even when it hurts, even when it's horribly uncomfortable, and especially when it's highly inconvenient. That is the arena where your mental strength gets tested. Not during the easy days, but when the lazy option sits right in front of you and you completely refuse it. Every time you choose hard discipline over an easy out, you break the grip of that old self. Every time you actually do what you said you'd do, you take back supreme authority over your life. But listen, that old version of you doesn't just vanish. It stays right there, waiting for your weak moments, waiting for deep fatigue, waiting for blind uncertainty. It doesn't even need to completely destroy you. It just needs you to hesitate. Because hesitation breeds doubt, and doubt creates the perfect breeding ground for total inaction. And the minute you stop acting, you start drifting. Once you drift, you completely lose your direction. As a practitioner, I see people lose decades this way without one single defining failure. They just stop making intentional choices. They let that lazy voice take the wheel, and they just call it normal. But there's nothing inevitable about this trap. The very second you and I realize our greatest obstacle is purely internal, absolutely everything changes. In our practice, we stop negotiating with excuses. No ideal conditions. We stop expecting motivation to strike before acting. Instead, we return to the only tool always available, our power to choose. The ancient Stoics never sought control over the external world. They sought absolute mastery over themselves, knowing the mind is the only domain where true power lives. Master this, and external conditions can no longer define you. The real question isn't what blocks your path today. Ask yourself, which part of your mind are you still obeying? The one chasing comfort, or the one demanding growth? The one that delays, or the one that acts? Because your life's outcome isn't decided by what happens to you. It is entirely decided by which version of yourself takes command. Until you and I confront that harsh truth without excuses or avoidance, we will keep fighting the wrong enemy entirely. Inside us, two forces are always at work. They aren't equal in strength, but equal in influence. Every single day, they wage war over our daily decisions. I don't see this as good versus evil. It's a clash between reason and impulse, the disciplined mind against raw desire. One part of your mind seeks order, clarity, and direction. It knows growth requires effort. It knows progress demands consistency, and that a meaningful life is built on deliberate action. The other side pushes back against all of that. It craves comfort, dodges the hard work, and begs you to delay the inevitable. Both voices live inside you. Neither will ever fully vanish, but only one gets to drive. That disciplined voice stays quiet. It doesn't shout. It never tries to create false urgency using raw emotion. It just states the facts. Wake up. Do the work. Follow the plan. Stay sharp. It offers zero guarantees of pleasure and no quick hits of dopamine. But it aligns with your highest potential. That weaker voice? It's highly emotional, urgent, and incredibly convincing. It whispers that you're exhausted. You deserve a break. Start tomorrow. Skipping one workout won't really matter anyway. It feels entirely natural to listen, because that voice is heavily rooted in your oldest habits. That's why so many blindly obey it, not from a lack of brains, but from years of practicing surrender. As philosophers, we must learn to observe these internal voices with zero attachment. You are not your fleeting impulses. You aren't your feelings. You are the judge deciding which voice speaks next. This mental separation is vital. Without it, you mistakenly identify with every random thought crossing your mind. You assume feeling angry means acting angry. But true Stoic discipline begins the second you separate emotion from execution. You might feel deep resistance, but you don't obey it. You might feel sharp discomfort, but you never run away. In my practice, resistance isn't a red light. It's a test to see if I will actually stand by my core principles. Every daily choice feeds one wolf. Pick the easy route, and you reinforce the weak part of your character. Choose what is hard, and you strengthen your capacity for growth. This isn't a one-time spiritual awakening. It is an endless grind of reinforcement. Character isn't built on good intentions. It's forged in repeated, daily action. You become what you consistently execute, not what you occasionally try. This is exactly where most folks lose control. They bet on motivation, a fleeting feeling, instead of relying on Stoic discipline, which never wavers. They wait around to feel ready, instead of acting regardless of the mood. Never underestimate the voice of comfort. It won't try to stop you completely. It rarely tells you to quit outright. It simply asks for a delay, a little less effort, a slight drop in your standards. Over time, those tiny slips pile up. You start accepting mediocrity. Not in one dramatic failure, but through 100 quiet surrenders. That is how human potential dies. Not through epic ruin, but through slow, steady compromise. Our disciplined inner voice demands strict consistency in the smallest actions. It demands you keep your promises, even when it hurts, even when nobody is looking. We build mental toughness through endless repetition, not short bursts of intensity. Ultimately, you and I decide our fate by choosing which voice to empower, not just today, but every single day. You and I face these quiet moments daily. Wake up or stall. Focus or check out. Act or stall. These aren't small choices. They literally build the framework of who you are. In my practice, the Stoics teach that life equals the sum of our choices, and those choices simply follow the internal voice we listen to the most. Let the voice of comfort take the wheel, and you stay stuck right here. Choose the hard path of discipline, and you actually start moving forward. Even when the gains feel brutally slow, don't bother trying to silence that voice of comfort. Honestly, it just cannot be done. That urge will always exist. Your job is simply to refuse to let it steer. You hear the weakness, but you deny it power. You see it sitting there, but you absolutely don't take orders from it. Instead, you side with the voice demanding real effort, the one requiring strict discipline to build a version of yourself you can actually respect. This isn't some rare one-off event. It is a daily, relentless practice. Each morning, you make the right call. The scales tip. That disciplined voice gets louder, much sharper and second nature. Meanwhile, the pull of comfort stays present, but completely loses its grip. Ultimately, no outside force dictates your path. It is entirely an inside job, a quiet choice repeated over and over. Which instinct are you going to trust? Which version of you gets to run the show? Defeat starts way before the final score. It takes root in a silent second, the exact moment you accept a weak thought without a fight. As a practitioner, I know the mind breaks first. Defeat doesn't start in our actions, but deep within our own judgment. One lazy internal nod dictates your entire day. Let enough of those slip by, and they will permanently alter the course of your life. You never wake up and just spontaneously ruin your life. You slowly surrender to mental whispers pulling you off the path you know is right. Since these excuses sound exactly like your own inner monologue, you rarely fight back. That mental chatter doesn't always show up looking weak. Usually it wears the clever mask of basic logic. It whispers that you're exhausted, that tomorrow is fine, the timing is off, or the current setup just isn't perfect yet. It pitches a delay, never a full quit, making it way easier to swallow. You don't even realize you're folding. You feel perfectly rational, and this is right where you and I usually lose our grip. We fail to see we're bargaining with the exact part of our brain terrified of hard work, pain, and real growth. Ancient wisdom warned us about this trap. The true first practice is mastering perception, seeing brutal reality, not the soft filter your lazy impulses create. You've got to interrogate that comfort-seeking instinct. Don't try to mute it. Drag it out into the harsh daylight. When it begs you to wait, demand to know what you're dodging. When it claims you deserve a break, ask if you truly earned the sweat. When it sells you on tomorrow, ask why today is suddenly not good enough. This is not about self-punishment. It is about raw honesty. Because without that baseline truth, you're stacking your future on cheap lies. And lies always end in bitter regret. In Stoic training, clear, sharp thinking is the absolute bedrock of human power. Let your logic get sloppy, and your actions tank right behind it. I've seen the same fatal loop in nearly every defeat. First, a weak idea pops up. Then it gets approved without friction. Action stalls. Your daily streak breaks. Deep down, your identity cracks. Suddenly, you stop seeing yourself as a closer who actually gets things done. You start feeling like a person who flinches, a person who delays. Just another guy who attempts the task, but never finishes. That is exactly how unchecked inner dialogue warps your self-worth over the years. Never from a single failure, but from 1,000 tiny surrenders. Once your self-image drops, your habits naturally sink to match. You simply behave like the person you think you are. We must separate raw facts from subjective feelings. The philosophy proves that external events matter far less than the story you tell yourself about them. The same rule governs your mind. Hitting a wall of discomfort is never a direct order to quit. It is just a flashing light confirming the work is hard. Waking up with zero motivation is not a valid excuse to stall. It is a standard roadblock you must plow through. But read those signals wrong, treating them as hard commands instead of passing weather, and you actively sabotage your own ambitions. This is how our brains betray us. Not from malice, but from a fatal misread. True discipline starts by strictly policing your own internal agreements. You can't block weak thoughts from arriving, but you hold absolute power over which ones get a seat and which get thrown out. Let's stick to the practice. Watch your mind. Audit those thoughts daily and ruthlessly cut anything dragging you away from your highest standards. Most people live completely backward. They accept every passing thought as valid, every emotion as guidance, and every sudden impulse as absolute truth. By doing that, they surrender total control over their own actions. They become entirely reactive instead of moving intentionally. The inner voice driving you toward failure is rarely loud. It never screams for your attention. It just quietly repeats itself until you stop fighting back. It gets familiar, and that familiarity breeds trust. You stop believing those excuses purely because you hear them constantly. But repeating a lie does not make it a reality. It just makes it easier to swallow. As students of Stoicism, we know truth is not measured by repetition. It is measured by how well it aligns with pure reason and clear purpose. If a thought pulls you away from doing what is necessary, that is not inner wisdom. It is just distraction. You must replace passive drifting with active, relentless judgment. Never let random thoughts drift through your mind unchecked. Interrogate them. Challenge them aggressively. Decide right then if they serve your actual goals or ruin them. Breaking old mental habits takes serious effort at first, because you are shattering a deeply reinforced pattern. But with dedicated daily practice, this discipline becomes second nature. You start to clearly spot the difference between a thought that builds mental toughness and one that breaks you. Once you see that truth, your life choices shift entirely. Ultimately, your outward actions just reflect your internal agreements. If you silently agree with an excuse, you will act weak. If you align yourself with discipline, you act with strength. There is zero neutral ground here. Let's unpack this together. Every thought you accept pushes you forward or drags you back. This is why Stoic philosophy focuses so heavily on mastering the mind. Govern it, and your behavior falls right into line. But if your mind remains entirely unexamined, it transforms into the absolute root of your limitations. So, the real question is not whether you actually have the potential to succeed. The question is whether you will fiercely challenge the inner voice holding you back. Because true failure starts the very second you accept a thought pulling you away from the work. And every real victory sparks the exact moment you flatly refuse to obey it. The most crucial battle of your entire life will never happen in public view. It does not happen under pressure from the crowd. It happens in total silence. In those quiet first moments after opening your eyes, long before the world starts talking. Before duties pile up and noise floods your mind, there is a tiny window where only one single question matters. Who is leading today? As philosophers, we treat the morning as the ultimate deciding moment, not because of the early hour, but because it is your first brutal test of self-mastery. You wake up. The body craves comfort. Your mind begs for delay. Then that old weak voice returns, whispering at you to stay in bed and wait. Right then, no external force is making the call. The choice is entirely yours. That is what makes it so incredibly powerful. Most people forfeit the day before it even starts. Not because they lack skill, but because they completely surrender in those opening minutes. They immediately grab for mindless distraction. They push back their intentions. They let weak impulses dictate their next move, setting a toxic daily pattern.
When your very first choice prioritizes comfort, the rest of your waking hours follow that exact same downward path. You end up reactive instead of deliberate.
You drift between tasks with zero clarity, zero purpose, and absolutely no internal control. We call this a total failure of self-governance. It is not a lack of talent, but a complete collapse of personal discipline right where it matters the most. Winning the morning is never about perfection. It is about deep philosophical alignment. It is the proving ground where you choose between your core principles and fleeting feelings. When you rise with clear intention. Even when motivation is dead, you establish absolute authority over your own behavior. You prove to yourself that taking action does not require feeling good. That is a massive paradigm shift. Because once you deeply realize you can execute without feeling ready, you destroy one of the absolute biggest roadblocks to personal growth. You stop waiting around for the perfect mental state, and you start relying entirely on ironclad commitment instead. There is a very specific reason why mental resistance feels heaviest at dawn. It is the exact moment your old destructive patterns wake up, desperate to reassert their control over you. That voice of comfort is not trying to defeat you completely today. It only wants to win that very first decision, because winning that buys it immediate momentum. A single delay breeds another. One tiny compromise immediately creates another. And before you even realize what happened, the entire architecture of your day is built on avoidance. So what do you and I take from this? Inconsistency starts with small, early concessions, not massive failures. Our Stoic practice is simple, but brutally demanding. You refuse to negotiate with the impulse to dodge the work. You acknowledge the feeling is present, but you simply do not obey it. When your brain screams at you to stay in bed, you stand up. When it begs for a delay, you start working. When it insists you are not ready, you attack the task anyway. For us practitioners, this isn't about force. It is about pure principle. You and I have already decided who we are. Our actions must reflect that, no matter the emotion. Every morning is our daily practice to carve that identity into reality through pure behavior, never just words. In this discipline, tiny actions at dawn carry far more weight than you might think. Reading some philosophy, writing out your plan, training your body, or just completing a basic chore. Alone, these seem trivial, but together, they forge an unbreakable pattern of focused execution. They train your mind that you hold the reins, that you execute your duties, and that you never hesitate. Lock this pattern in, and the friction fades. True momentum doesn't come from short bursts of intensity. It comes from relentless consistency. The ancient Stoics knew true discipline is forged through daily repetition, not random effort. Conquer your morning, and you won't erase hardship, but you will completely transform how you face it. You stop acting like a victim, reacting to events. You steer your own actions with fierce intention. Obstacles will still remain. Noise will still surround you, but it won't dictate your conduct. You've already made your ruling, and that morning victory carries forward. This is why our dawn ritual matters. It isn't about blind productivity. It is absolute control. It's proving to yourself, in the starkest terms, that you can govern your own mind. And the dark reverse is true. Surrender the morning, and you step into the day already compromised. You shatter your own high standard, immediately eroding the sovereign authority you hold over yourself. It gets much easier to procrastinate, easier to excuse laziness, and easier to slide down the path of least resistance. Left unchecked, this builds a vicious loop that's incredibly hard to shatter. Not because it's complicated, but because it feels safe. You get used to waking up without purpose, and mental drift simply becomes your permanent default state. The original Stoics never waited for a spark of motivation. They anchored themselves to duty. They saw every single dawn as a training ground for discipline, demanding strict alignment with logic and deeply held virtues. This mindset completely strips away the need to feel inspired. You execute the task in front of you simply because it is your solemn obligation. When we anchor our mornings to this philosophy, we stop asking if we feel good enough, and we simply act because the work demands it. Ultimately, those crucial first hours are a mirror. They reflect your true capacity for absolute self-governance. They expose exactly whose orders you follow, what strict standard you maintain, and which version of yourself you're building. There are no cheering crowds or quick trophies, only a silent ruling that sets the tone for the entire day. Conquer this silent, lonely battle every single dawn, and you forge an iron self-mastery that extends far beyond the morning hours. You won't transform your existence by tweaking random habits. Total life transformation only happens when you brutally redefine who you believe you are. Stoic philosophy teaches us that actions aren't random accidents. They express your core character, and that character is forged through relentless daily identity building. The masses try to level up by merely hacking surface habits. They aim for earlier alarms, longer grinds, and vague consistency. Yet deep down they still view themselves as the exact same weak person, someone who constantly struggles, someone who flinches, someone who will inevitably crawl back into familiar comfort. Since the root identity never shifted, the old toxic habits always return. You simply cannot outwork your own self-image for very long. You always revert. If you label yourself as undisciplined, every single hurdle just becomes concrete proof confirming that negative bias. If you identify as a quitter, then every minor roadblock just gives you an automatic excuse to surrender. This happens not out of weakness, but because the human brain craves absolute alignment with whatever it accepts as truth. A true Stoic will tell you that your internal judgment controls your path far more than any external storm. You always obey your self-image, whether that mental blueprint empowers your growth or keeps you totally caged. This is exactly why cheap motivation dies out. It forces output without ever upgrading the core identity, guaranteeing a painful relapse. To completely transform, you and I must claim a higher standard today. Not as some distant future goal, but as an immediate, ironclad ruling. You don't sit around hoping to grow disciplined. You decree that you are a disciplined practitioner now, and execute accordingly. You don't wait for consistency to magically appear. You choose strict consistency right now, especially in the microscopic tasks. This isn't about fluffy affirmations. It is pure philosophical alignment. Every single choice either hammers your new identity into place. There are zero neutral actions. When you execute exactly what you promised, even on tiny duties, you prove to your soul that you are solid. Delay or dodge the work, and you instantly validate the coward within. In our practice, these moments stack up. Your identity hardens. Stoic practice demands we strip emotion right out of the equation. You never stop to ask if you feel like working. You only ask if this choice aligns with the person you decided to become. If yes, you move. If it does not, you walk away. That brings total clarity. No more bargaining with your bad moods. You anchor yourself to a principle. Principles stand firm. Feelings just blow around. When strict rules guide your behavior, actual consistency finally happens. The work itself stays hard, but the daily choices get simpler. Zero mental debate left, just pure execution. People think they need to go discover their identity. As practitioners, we know you build it, brick by brick, through harsh, disciplined action. You mold yourself into a strong person by repeating the actions a strong person takes. Someone reliable is not defined by good intentions. They are defined by honoring their word, over and over, without fail. Mental toughness is never built by talking tough. It is forged by marching through hell without backing down once. Your self-image runs on hard evidence, and you forge that proof through daily, practical choices. That is exactly why quiet habits beat loud bragging. Anybody can claim a new path. Few have the grit to walk it every single day. You do not need to prove your character to anyone. You have to prove it to yourself. Every single action aligned with your core standard reinforces who you are. Every time you fold and fail to act, you chip away at it. Those tiny moments stack up into your self-worth, and your self-worth dictates exactly what you believe you can actually pull off. The weak, older version of you stays chained to an entirely familiar identity. It feels warm. It asks for zero effort, zero heavy lifting, zero self-mastery. But it keeps you small. This new Stoic path demands total commitment. It demands absolute consistency, deep accountability, and the cold logic to work without motivation. Breaking these old habits hurts. You're fighting mental wiring that has been solidifying for literal years. Listen, you and I know this discomfort is not a warning sign. It is just the raw feeling of growth. You have to kill off the old identity that drags you down. Not slowly, not partially. You cut it off completely. You cannot pretend to hold high standards while letting old, weak habits run your actual life. In philosophical terms, we call this integrity. Total alignment across what you speak, think, and actually do. Missing that alignment breaks your spirit. You talk big, but act small, and that gap breeds a miserable, constant internal war. Once you forge that alignment, once your daily grind matches your stated goals, the mental war vanishes. Ultimately, hoping for a better life changes nothing. Reality only shifts when you harden into a completely different person entirely. Not a new look, not empty speeches. I mean raw behavior, drilled endlessly until it becomes second nature. You never rise up to meet your shiny goals. You plummet down to the baseline of your actual identity. To get a different outcome, decide who you are today. Then go out and force that reality into existence through pure action. Understand this. Discipline is not self-punishment. It is the steel framework that breaks you out of your own mental prison. The masses misjudge discipline. They see it as a cage. They think it means suffering, forcing misery, and stripping all the joy out of life. We practice a very different philosophy here. We view discipline as true self-mastery. It is the quiet power to follow cool logic instead of blind, heated impulse. Without true discipline, you are never free. You are just a puppet to your current mood, and human moods are chaotic, totally unreliable, and notoriously full of lies. An undisciplined mind thinks it has freedom simply because it chases every random desire blindly. But actually, they are just reacting, chasing urges, dodging discomfort, losing focus. The second the real work gets hard, they stall. They surrender the moment inspiration dies. They dodge the heavy lifting. That is not freedom at all. It is an addiction to comfort. You and I know true freedom is having the grit to do what is right, regardless of the pain, ignoring what your lazy brain wants. That is exactly what discipline provides. It rips the steering wheel away from your impulses. The weak, past version of you survives entirely on endless negotiation. It constantly seeks shortcuts, ducks away from real duty, and endlessly justifies doing nothing. It whispers pathetic excuses. Do I feel ready for this? Should I wait for tomorrow? Can I start later? We all ask it. It seems harmless, but hesitation kills your momentum entirely. Discipline kills that internal negotiation. It sets an uncompromising standard. You do the work because it is required, not because you feel ready. That mindset shift shatters your inconsistency. You stop waiting for the perfect moment. You forge it right now through sheer action. Discipline demands a toll, but it is much cheaper than you think. The friction of fighting your lazy impulses is strictly temporary. It hits you in the moment, and then it vanishes. But the agony of regret? Knowing you dodged the exact work you needed to do? Knowing you stayed stagnant, breaking promises to yourself, That kind of pain does not wash away. It sticks to your bones. It festers. It piles up and warps your self-image. The ancient Stoics knew this truth perfectly. Take the sharp, quick sting of discipline over the crushing, endless weight of personal regret. Each time you act with iron intent, you actively starve your old self. You strip the power from the toxic habits holding you hostage. This will not happen overnight, and it definitely brings heavy resistance. Your old destructive patterns will still appear. The urge to slack off stays, but ignoring it gets easier. Why? Every disciplined move builds hard proof that you are capable of greatness. You prove you can execute regardless of your feelings. That undeniable proof builds rock-solid personal confidence. Not empty affirmations, but confidence forged in repeated fire. True Stoic discipline is not about extreme intensity, it is simply about consistency. It demands commitment, not flawless perfection. You are going to mess up along the way. Distractions will happen, but you simply reset to your standard without complaining. When you drop the ball, you fix it immediately. When doubt creeps in, you step forward anyway. Drop the toxic self-pity that paralyzes you. Just stay aware and adjust your aim. Real discipline is not faking some perfect ideal. It is keeping the hard promises you already made to yourself. When the reps add up, it stops feeling like a massive chore. It simply becomes who you are. The constant daily fight becomes automatic. You stop debating whether to do the work. You just execute. That is the moment discipline turns into true freedom. Mood swings, passing pain, and laziness no longer hold the reins to your life. You run on core principles now, forging absolute stability. Your output turns predictable. Your personal growth locks in, and you finally take back the wheel of your own life. That weak, older version of you cannot breathe in a disciplined mind. It feeds on your hesitation and your craving for comfort over action. Starve those moments, and its grip on you completely dies. The voice never fully vanishes, but it loses all power to steer your actions. You hear the lazy impulse, but you reject it. You feel the pull of the couch, but you put your boots on anyway. This is actual freedom. You do not erase the hardship, you erase the power that hardship used to hold over you. Let's be clear here. Discipline is never a chain around your neck. It is the chisel that shapes you. It decides if you rot in place or aggressively push forward. It dictates whether you live up to your raw potential or surrender to cheap thrills. Once you finally realize that discipline is a practical weapon, not a heavy burden, a form of total self-mastery, not a punishment, you begin wielding it differently. You stop fighting it. You lean on it. Why? Because it is the only bridge out of your old limitations, forging a person who refuses to bow to modern comfort. The world does not hand you rewards when the weather clears up. It pays out the second your daily decisions finally change. That shift strikes the moment you stop defeating yourself. The masses just sit around waiting for results before doing the work. They beg for signals that life is getting easier, that opportunities are just appearing, hoping the environment finally tilts in their favor. But as practitioners, we know better. Outcomes follow character. The outside world bends to the person you become, not the wishes you make. Until you lock down control over your own two hands, the world around you will always be chaotic. So you and I need to remember this. Conquering yourself does not instantly change your bank account. It changes your iron consistency. You finally honor your own word. You get out of bed exactly when the alarm hits. You strike when you planned to strike. You actually finish the mission you started. These are quiet victories. No one else sees them. but they rebuild trust in yourself. In my daily practice, I've learned the Stoics valued this inner integrity above everything. When your actions match your principles, internal friction vanishes. You stop arguing with your own mind. The hesitation dies. You move with sharp clarity, and that clarity builds immense momentum. That momentum drives real-world change. It is not because the obstacles vanish, but because your own response to adversity grows unbreakable. Walls that used to block you become mere steps in your routine. Discomfort that once triggered procrastination is simply expected. Resistance no longer catches you off guard. You are armed and ready. This mental shift compounds your progress. While the masses wait for perfect weather, you just execute. While ordinary people chase fleeting motivation, you forge iron discipline. Give it time, and that gap becomes undeniable. Reality rewards daily consistency, because showing up builds reliability, and reliability gets results. Not immediately, but always inevitably. As Stoic students, we do not rely on luck. We believe in relentless preparation, finally meeting opportunity. Stay consistent, and you stay prepared. Build your discipline, and you are always ready. Then, when the right door opens, you simply walk through. The average person misses their shot, not from bad luck, but because they lack the foundation to strike when the moment comes. They freeze. They doubt everything. They wait. But when you train your mind to act past your feelings, fear loses all its leverage. There is a deeper prize when you stop defeating yourself. You earn a supreme sense of control that nothing can strip away. Wealth comes and goes. The world spins. But knowing you can truly depend on your own daily actions remains rock solid. This is what our ancient teachers called real power. Not crushing your enemies, but conquering your own mind. Hit this milestone, and your confidence stops depending on external scoreboards. It runs on cold, hard evidence. You have shown yourself day after day that you embody true discipline, that you keep your promises, that you face the pain without backing down. This core stability rewires how you experience human existence. You stop playing the comparison game. Your only metric is your personal standard of excellence. Applause no longer dictates your mood, because your sense of worth is forged entirely through your actions. Failure stops breaking your spirit. You and I know that real growth is a grueling marathon, not a lottery ticket. We are taught that true peace flows from living your values, not hoarding gold. Stop fighting your own shadow, and you finally taste that pure alignment. The payoff for this mindset shift is rarely flashy or instant, but it never fails. Your mind stays sharp because you refuse to entertain weak negotiations with laziness. You strike with precision because you no longer need your fragile emotions to grant permission. You bounce back from ruin instantly. Your brain focuses on rapid correction, not cowardly avoidance. Month after month, these edges stack up. The agonizing grind becomes your new baseline. The impossible suddenly looks workable, and that distant peak finally starts coming into clear view. Get this straight. Life does not care about your flawless execution. It pays for grit. You will lose some mental fights. You will stumble. But you can absolutely refuse to crawl back into that old habit of quitting. You spot an error, you fix it. You miss the mark, you recalibrate the sights. Zero need for stalling. Zero room for useless pity that breeds further pathetic inaction. Our predecessors practiced relentless improvement. They knew perfection was a trap, but progress was sacred. Ultimately, My philosophy comes down to this core truth. You and I only battle ourselves. Not the guy next door, just the person we were yesterday. When you finally stop surrendering to your past self, when you pick hard discipline over comfort, action over delay, cold principle over weak impulse, your existence transforms, not through a cinematic montage, but through a brutal, steady daily grind. As you stack those days, reality mirrors the iron order you built in your mind. The universe gives 0 points for your good intentions. It only pays you for the work you actually finish. Build yourself to the point where your word is law, where your actions hit your highest standards with 0 debate. Once you live there, chasing success stops entirely. Success simply becomes the mandatory byproduct of the warrior you evolved into.